So I'm Tristan. The pronouns I use are they, them, or he, him. I'm a Master's of Social Work student at Wilfrid Laurier University in my last year. I am an employee of a local organization, Extend a Family, providing abuse awareness and prevention trainings and direct support to individuals with largely developmental disabilities. And I'm disabled myself.
And what is that like for you, your disability, if you can share?
Could you clarify that a little bit? There's an awful lot of ways I could take that question.
Definitely. I guess I would just like to share, like you to share your diagnosis if you're willing. If not, that's okay, and we can move on. But it's just so people can identify with you, or just understand what it is you go through.
Okay, sounds good. And thank you for that. So I am diagnosed with autism, and I consider myself to be culturally autistic. So I describe myself generally as autistic rather than a person with autism, certainly not a person afflicted with autism or anything like that. It comes with a set of strengths and weaknesses that's unique to me, although lots of parts of that are shared with other folks with the same diagnosis. I find that it makes me a better researcher. It makes me a better teacher, because when I'm in the role of trying to communicate something that's important to me to someone else, that's what I'm doing. It's something that I deeply care about, and I will put all of myself into that space. And it's certainly been interesting to take what I consider to be maybe a physiology that was not really designed for intensive work with people, and go do intensive work with people. I do a lot of gaming, and I think of it as I've respect myself in a direction that I did not originally design my character to be good at, but here I am, doing trainings, doing support for other folks, doing a lot of work around communication and emotions, and I'm hoping that out of my program I end up getting to go into individual and group counseling with some community work on the side. When it comes down to how my disability affects various aspects of my life, it has made for a need for accommodations. I didn't get a diagnosis until I was 25, meaning that I was in my last semester of my undergraduate degree. I was told by my assessing psychologist that I really shouldn't have been trying to take more than 2 or 3 credits at a time. Meanwhile, I'd been doing a full course load the entire time. No wonder I was exhausted. It took over a year for me to recover from doing that program. And I'd say there's still things that haven't really recovered, but here I am in a new one. And so I process things deeply, but it takes a long time for that sometimes. So I find that I will have a lot to say on a subject, but to get started on it, to get going, there's a lot of nuance. That nuance is important to me. That doesn't often fit in 100 words. So that can be a challenge with assignments. I've got some difficulties in noisy environments, especially hearing people well. So I've had a lot of discussions with professors in this course, or in this program, about closed captioning or transcripts for lecture videos, and especially when they're asking, because I'm in an online program, asking my fellow students to provide captions or a transcript if we need to make videos to watch of each other's, because if someone has recorded something on their phone and the sound quality isn't good, there was an assignment that I just gave up and took a 0 on because I couldn't hear people. And I had asked about transcripts early on and no one did it. So I just said I can't because there was no way. I would say one of my big areas is executive dysfunction. So it's described as working memory. So it's like, imagine that if a lot of folks, neurotypical folks, have a big work table that they can keep all of their mental projects on, and they've got like a little notepad for phone numbers and their grocery list and their friends' birthdays and those 3 projects that they're working on right now. I've got like a TV table, and if I try to stack more than 1 or 2 things on that TV table, I can't get at what was on the bottom, or it just collapses and I get nothing done, which is quite the challenge when I'm working and a student and trying to handle just taking care of myself as well as various volunteer engagements. I've recently been looking into coping strategies developed by and for folks with ADHD, because a lot of those executive dysfunction challenges are shared between ADHD and autism.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense to me, the kind of link there. And Tristan, I want to ask specifically kind of how things are going for you through the pandemic.
So it's definitely been rough in a lot of ways. I really miss getting to see my partner and my parents and friends in person. I've made really active efforts in the past couple of years to develop a social network, knowing how important that is. I had to come at it from a kind of an anthropology side to get it, but then I was able to take that like broad academic perspective and apply it back to myself and be like, okay, well, if this is a thing that's important for communities, people in communities, I am a person in a community, so I need a community. So I went to things and I made myself incredibly uncomfortable going to social events where I knew absolutely no one, but I learned to know people and get close to people, and I've got quite a network of people who I now can't visit. And although I'm really used to having friends all over the province and sometimes all over the continent that I mostly see online, having that be the only option is making that feel really oppressive, where everything I'm doing is in front of the computer. I love being in front of the computer for maybe 4 hours at a time. And when it's 12, there's only so much. It's been really pushing my ability to basically self-regulate, remember to take breaks and eat and go outside. And these things don't really come naturally to me. So I had been able to depend on some external schedule and just expectations. And now there's very little of that. I'm in the same space, same clothes, you know, but I'm doing what I can. I think something that is really, really difficult is being a politically and socially minded person with an understanding of how like big macro issues work in society, and feeling like my capacity is next to nothing to really engage, knowing that there are folks out there who refuse to wear masks and are having protests, and nobody's got the energy to go counter protest that. Or, you know, we need to be writing into our MPs and calling about, you know, trying to get the CERB extended into a permanent program. Like, that's something that really matters to me. And I also maybe hadn't eaten until 4 p.m. and I have to make choices between taking care of myself or trying to take care of myself as a very large collective. And I live by myself, and the collective can't take care of me right now in that way. So I'm having to prioritize care for myself, but it feels ethically hard. It makes it that much harder to make sense of what's going on when I know people are out there getting hurt and I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, that's huge. I think a lot of people will understand where you're coming from with that sense. You know, we do want to be out there, we do want to be engaged, but we're also tired, and we're also under a pandemic, and we're struggling to do those daily things. Do you find, my next question was, are your needs being met by this community? Is it supporting you? Would you outright say no, or do you think it's depends?
I think that, and I mean, community is a really interesting word to use as well. I am also transgender, and some of my first sort of, like community programming kind of stuff was trans-related programming in Toronto. And there was a project that they wanted us to do, like we're offering to us, of putting together a zine. And someone had really been asking some hard questions. And this is one of those strengths of an autistic brain, is to sometimes be like, nope, here's that hard question. I'm just going to ask it right now. Because this was another person sharing that same diagnosis. It was like, what do you mean by community? I don't feel like I'm part of this. I'm here, but this is not what community means to me. And so I like to ask myself, like, what does community really mean to me? And who am I actually in community with? And to me, community is reciprocal interdependence, where I have something to offer others and they have something to offer me. We know each other, at least in passing, and know what we're all bringing to make this space something that is unique to us, something that is a little subculture, where we can come when we need something and we can offer when we have something, and we will be missed if we're not there. I feel like my workplace has a really strong sense of, community is if you'd be missed if you're not there, but they don't push the interdependence side as much. And I feel like, from what I've learned, especially from reading about, hearing from, visiting events by Indigenous nations, there's sense of community. This is not me putting words in anyone's mouth. This is what I've tried to understand. That sense of community is that everyone has a place and everyone is working for a mutual benefit. And so I have that in some places in my life. I have, I think, an excellent friend group who we do what we can for each other online. I've had some groups that have managed to pivot to meeting entirely online. A volunteer group that I'm with just managed to run a Trans Day of Remembrance series of events last week. We planned all of that online, and we brought together 30 people for a vigil online. And by doing that, we made space for each other, and we built on each other's strengths, held each other up when we were having a hard time. That's community space to me. But my disability community is not in KW. I know people in Toronto, I know people in Hamilton, I know people who are in Kitchener, but I don't feel like I have connections outside of my workplace to organizations. And that's something I'd like to work on if I have the capacity, right? There's only so much I can do. But I'm getting most of what I need I just need hugs and nobody can give me that right now. And I'm going to be salty about that until we get a vaccine, but that's how it's got to be.
Yeah, that's for sure. What can you tell us a little bit about what your work is? I almost said what it is, but tell me.
Uh, so the work that I do at Extended Family, apart from the workshops, which don't happen very often, is a lot of being flexible to support folks in doing pretty much whatever they want to that the passport funding system will cover. And the broad goal is to get people involved in, again, that word community that we all use that none of us tend to define very well. And coming from a social work kind of lens where I have a lot more to offer than is strictly required of me in this role. There's some folks that I work with who just kind of want to get out of the house. And so I do whatever I can to make that happen and keep some spice in it, make sure that it's, it's always directed by the person who's getting the service, because this is about them. This is not about me. This is not about what I want. And from the perspective of someone who has experienced a lot of professionals and organizations assuming that they know what I need and how I need to get it, I can feel it. And at least I'm highly verbal and have over many years taught myself how to speak up when something is wrong. And so for someone who doesn't have those skills or abilities, it's gotta suck. I can only imagine how, I'd be throwing things if I really wanted somebody to let me have access to some of my complicated, tactical turn-based strategy games. And somebody's like, do you want to read another Arthur book? Like, you can, so I really try to make sure that I treat people the way, not necessarily the way I would want to be treated, because we're different people, but to try to put myself, how would I want someone to approach me if they knew they were a stranger to me and wanted to make sure that I was getting what I needed and wanted out of this. I've done some pretty cool stuff. And I think one of the biggest pieces is really developing a bond with the person and being reliable, being more than just another person who's paid to be friends with them. That's one of the big issues that I find in this line of work, in the whole sort of disability industry, is that there's a lot of people who essentially get paid to be the friend of someone with a disability, and not nearly enough of connecting people who have disabilities with each other over something other than that they have a disability. There are some folks for whom their disability is a special interest, and that's great. But if folks would prefer to be meeting on other things and doing it in a way that isn't dependent on the involvement of a non-disabled person, and that's why I feel like community is pretty weak in most places for folks with disabilities, especially folks with intellectual disabilities, because folks just, a lot of folks, service providers, feel bad for folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and that instinct to rush in and help can really get in the way of treating the person as a full human being who needs to be able to make their own connections. I have gone all over the place with that one, but
no, I appreciate it, and I think I can relate. I didn't realize that extended family worked on passport funding. I've worked with passport funding before, and I love it. It's awesome. But it's paid friendship, and it's unfortunate, but it's also necessary, right? If you don't have that kind of funding, and a lot of individuals may end up not having any support for recreation and well-being and things like that. So I really, really appreciate that it exists. It's just a matter of, you're right, like it should come within community rather than an outside paid support. So it sounds like extended family is pretty intentional about that.
Yeah, like there are some really wonderful things. It was on hold for a while, but they found a way to do it virtually. I keep forgetting, I think it's the open space gatherings, where they'd be at cafes and whatnot around Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge, to try to foster those, where it's just an open invitation to anybody really to just drop in and hang out and get to know each other. So I look forward to more and more of that kind of stuff developing as the paradigm shifts. It is not that long ago since the last institution closed in Ontario, and society is having to adapt very quickly, when attitudes, I heard something recently, attitudes take 5 generations to change or something like that. And it's been maybe, what, 20, 30 years? And not so long for some. And to go from assuming that you will never meet a person with a disability in your life to expecting, and not only expecting, but looking for the absence of people with disabilities everywhere in society, is a big shift, but it's not one that I'm going to give the world a free pass on just because it's big.
Yeah, and I find that challenging, and this is just a personal share now, but find that challenging in social work because I can have this huge passion for disabilities and work with them, and then I can have a classmate that, like, I literally just had some presentations about migrant workers and how disadvantaged they are, and oppressed is a better word than disadvantaged in this case, but I want to get passionate about that too, and it's so hard to essentially not pick and choose, but let the world know and focus on something to really try to make a difference rather than kind of getting pulled to pieces and drawn everywhere.
Yeah, that's where an intersectional approach is incredibly important, because if you shift away from the group that is the loudest about their needs, is where my attention and funding and time is going to go towards what structures in the way we run our world hold up systems that keep people on the margins. You can address a whole lot of things by going to the roots instead of constantly putting band-aids on everybody who's gotten hurt. So, we need people doing all of those things, because there's a lot of people who need band-aids right now. Just being like, oh, no, we're working on what got you hurt, but, deal with the bleeding yourself. You can't do that either. So it's tough, but it's the work worth doing.
I agree. So I'll move on to the next question. What can we learn from you about managing a health crisis or a health challenge, and how can we apply that to, living in a pandemic?
Well, okay, so this one's going to be a little salty, the first thing on my mind, but there have been some wonderful pandemic memes this year. That's one of the, I swear some pop culture class 20 years from now is going to be like memes 2020 is just like a week. But there's been a lot of kind of discourse early on of like, why are people feeling like they can't breathe when they're wearing a mask? Why do so many people feel like they can't breathe and they have to have this off? I was like, welcome to your first panic attack, friends. Now do you want to fund some mental health services? Because folks who have never dealt with their body or their mind or both rebelling against something that has to be done are going to be completely at sea because they've never dealt with it before and they don't have resources. And our society is sorely lacking in education from childhood about how to regulate our own feelings in healthy ways. That's sort of one of my passions, and one of the things I want to get into counseling for is to help people patch what they didn't learn when they were younger, about how to recognize what they're feeling and validate it, but make choices about how they're going to respond to that internal feeling. There's an awful lot of things in the world that I think would be improved if people took a little bit more space between having a feeling and acting on it. And I feel like some things that are really huge are, they're not dissimilar to good advice about going through grief, because that's a thing that all of us can relate to. And this pandemic is a loss for all of us, even if we don't lose a person close to us. We have lost opportunities. We have lost closeness. A lot of people have lost health due to changed patterns, or they haven't been able to work out, or they haven't been able to access as much fresh food because they're having to buy 2 months apocalypse shopping in advance, or people are more fearful. I worry the number of OCD diagnoses that are going to come out of this pandemic from folks who can't, because it was so real for so long that your groceries, that bag that you didn't wash could kill you. It's going to stick around after coronavirus is gone. And looking at that as a burden or the second pandemic is not helpful. I would like, if I could choose an outcome for this, it would be a silver lining version where everyone who had never really realized that mental health or disability applied to them, that they had one, they just do things. They're fine, but now they're not fine. And if this can be an empathy building lesson, that we all realize how vitally important it is that we work together to take care of our physical and mental health, and look at the ways that we've structured our society that make it easier and harder to get around in certain circumstances. Like overnight, most folks were able to start wearing masks to stores and line up and wait their turn. Not everyone, but we managed to do that. We managed to pivot to online meetings in weeks, days. And it had been how many years that people with mobility issues had been asking to be able to have these things. If we can use these lessons, if they can stay and expand so that we look at we actually build community that encompasses our geographical regions, so that everyone in an area is really pulling together to take care of each other, and not just faceless houses and apartment buildings where, good luck if you need something, if your wheelchair runs out of juice and or your scooter or whatever, and or there are so many things that we could be doing for each other that we don't because of assumptions we have and patterns that we have and structures that make it literally hard to help each other. If we can take 2020 as the year that we start changing those systems so that all of us can struggle less in future, that would be gold.
Yeah, I love that. And I that's been my kind of hope that, you know, helps me get through all of everything. And I just really hope there's some sort of leadership that comes out of it, right? Like it's hard to see it right now, but you know, it's all the leadership we're seeing is money, or we got to balance the sides, and this was our kind of opportunity to be progressive and to be pushy. It doesn't seem heard, but that's, you know, something for another day.
Well, something that makes me hopeful, and I think that's another thing, is you have to maintain a sense of hope and purpose, that, and you have to let go of what, you know, your grandparents expected you to have a car and a house by age X and have, you know, they wanted grandkids, so I guess you're getting married and like, you know, you're supposed to have X kind of job and you're supposed to marry Y kind of person and you're supposed to have, you know, 2.5 kids and a white picket fence. Well, most of us have never been able to have that. That's been a myth. The 50s was a weird little bubble, and it was never like that before, and it hasn't been like that since. And yet that's the standard that we're all held to. Let go. Just let go of it. You will be happier and healthier for exploring who you are on the inside and really like giving yourself some time to find who that person is. I've had to do that in a very explicit and very very invasive way, honestly, with professionals involved, as a trans person and as an autistic person. Um, like a lot of my a lot of my identities are diagnoses where someone from the outside had to come in and tell me, yes, you are deserving of calling yourself this, of feeling that you are part of this group. And that took a lot of developing a sense of, like, a bulletproof sense of who I am. I know why I identify with this gender. Do you? Like, does that, you know, how many people have had to really think, why do you care about these things that you care about in your life? And again, a pandemic, any kind of hard shock makes you reevaluate your priorities. But nope, I've lost it. I had that point about hope and priorities and what was
Well, I was going to say, how about resiliency? Because that's my next question.
okay.
What does resiliency mean for you?
So resiliency is a tricky one, because resiliency is something a lot of the time that is asked of people who shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. And we praise the people who are able to come up and speak and who have managed to make some sort of good meaning out of getting dealt a weird set of cards that don't mesh well with the structures out there and people's expectations. And so people who are able to make the best of it are held up as leaders and paragons, and this lovely phrase, inspiration porn, for everyone else to, you know, get to feel warm and fuzzy because a person with a disability did a thing. They managed to overcome obstacles, but you know, one reframing tool that I've run into is, like, if you see one of those news articles of, you know, like, you know, school comes together to fund a new wheelchair for, you know, 8-year-old. It's like, flip that to government services refuses to fund a wheelchair for an 8-year-old after they grew out of their old one. I was like, children should not be having to fundraise for each other's basic needs, y'all. Nor should any of us be having to fundraise for our own or each other's basic needs. You know, another good one was, I look forward to a day when libraries are fully funded by the federal government and the Air Force has to run a bake sale for a new bomber. That one's been around since the 60s, I think. But, you know, the same thing applies. So I don't want people to have to be resilient. But my God, the things that people are able to do where they will get themselves up and make meaning and make something happen for themselves because they had to. There's no other option. People that manage to, despite, you know, depression that doesn't want to let them out of bed, they manage to get up and clean their side table before they went back to bed. That's resilience. People who manage to overcome their social anxiety well enough to go to one of the Black Lives Matter protests that have been going on this year that, by the way, are still ongoing. And another thing is all of the Indigenous land defender work and folks that manage to dig out $5 to donate towards land defense efforts, who managed to just show up and be like, hey, we appreciate the work you're doing. And that's all you managed to do that day, but you showed up. And you know what? That's better than 99% of the population. You at least showed up. You donated $5 once. And I don't want people to knock what they are able to do. Again, don't compare it. You woke up today and you're planning on still being alive when you go to bed. And that's step one for being resilient. Everything else after that is gravy, seriously. You know, those of us who live with disabilities, with chronic illnesses of all kinds, know well what it's like to deal with that. And everybody else is getting a crash course in being gentle with themselves. And I'd say whenever you've got that one extra spoon, you know, if you know spoon theory, you've got one extra spoon that you can put towards a community effort, something that will address the issue that knocked you down to begin with. Remember that that is being multiplied by so many other people's effort, and your effort is worthwhile. Your effort is worthy, and you deserve to be there. You can do this. And you know you can. You don't need me to tell you that. That's resilience too. You don't need me to tell you, but it sure feels nice to be told. So.
Thank you. I feel like I just received counseling / a motivational speech. So I think that was a good one. Thank you so much. That's all the questions I have. But if there's anything you'd like to add, now's the time.
Well, I think that one last piece, if I could add one extra layer of nuance, it is really easy to get caught up in what we're dealing with ourselves. Mm-hmm. And one phrase I've run into is the oppression Olympics, where people will do a lot of harm kind of sideways and downwards because of a desperation to get some sort of access, some sort of inclusion, some sort of validation. And so there will be folks who are struggling to make ends meet, who aren't real happy with demands being made by people of color, or who will, you know, hop on social media comments and make threats against Indigenous people for just claiming what was always theirs, instead of seeing that we're all fighting together. Like, these efforts to make the world more just are efforts to make the world more just, not like, someone else getting more rights and services shouldn't mean that we lose something that we had. If we're all getting what we need, like if we're all working together to put pressure on policymakers and, like something I like to imagine is one of these days there will be an issue that will get enough Canadians upset that more than a couple of thousand people show up to an important protest. That, if we could move from 1% to 25% of the population that is politically engaged in trying to make the world the one we wanted to live in, the one we were told when we were kids, don't fight someone else who's also oppressed. You can be mutual allies. I'm whitest of white. And I have a responsibility to be as good an ally as I can to folks who deal with racism. And that responsibility doesn't go away just because I'm disabled and transgender and have like a dozen other social locations that make life harder. I still have to be a good ally. I still have to work on decolonizing myself. And they, in turn, had better learn my pronouns. This is something that we should work together on. We'll be stronger for it.
Yeah, that's definitely how we would like things to be. Being hopeful, optimistic is definitely something that, I don't know, has kept me going and has kept a lot of people going, and not only being optimistic, but being willing to make that reality, right? So thank you, Tristan. I'm very pleased to have met you.